Trump's useful idiots. A bankrupt liberal class, by signing on for the Zionist witch hunt against supposed antisemites and refusing to condemn Israel for its genocide, provided the bullets to its executioners. Written by Chris Hedges for the Chris Hedges Report, chrishedges.substack.com. Narrated by Eunice Wong. The media, universities, the Democratic Party, and liberals, by embracing the fiction of rampant anti-Semitism, laid the groundwork for their own demise. Columbia and Princeton, where I have taught, and Harvard, which I attended, are not incubators of hatred towards Jews. The New York Times, where I worked for 15 years, and which Trump calls an enemy of the people, is slavishly subservient to the Zionist narrative. What these institutions have in common is not anti-Semitism, but liberalism. And liberalism, with its creed of pluralism and inclusiveness, is slated by our authoritarian regime for obliteration. The conflation of outrage over the genocide with anti-Semitism is a sleazy tactic to silence protest and placate Zionist donors, the billionaire class and advertisers. These liberal institutions, weaponizing anti-Semitism, aggressively silenced and expelled critics, banned student groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine, allowed police to make hundreds of arrests of peaceful protests on campuses, purged professors, and groveled before Congress. Use the words apartheid and genocide, and you are fired or excoriated. Zionist Jews in this fictional narrative are the oppressed. Jews who protest the genocide are slandered as Hamas stooges and punished. Good Jews, bad Jews. One group deserves protection. The other deserves to be thrown to the wolves. This odious bifurcation exposes the charade. In April 2024, Columbia University President Minouche Shafik, along with 2 board members and a law professor, testified before the House of Representative Education Committee. They accepted the premise that anti-Semitism was a significant problem at Columbia and other higher education institutions. When co-chair of the Board of Trustees of Columbia University, David Greenwald, and others told the committee that they believed "from the river to the sea" and "long live the Intifada" were anti-Semitic statements, Shafik agreed. She threw students and faculty under the bus, including longtime professor Joseph Massad. The day after the hearings, Shafik suspended all the students at the Columbia protests and called in the New York City Police Department, NYPD, who arrested at least 108 students. "I have determined that the encampment and related disruptions pose a clear and present danger to the substantial functioning of the university," Shafik wrote in her letter to the police. NYPD Chief John Chell, however, told the press, "The students that were arrested were peaceful, offered no resistance whatsoever, and were saying what they wanted to say in a peaceful manner." What disciplinary action has been taken against that professor? Representative Elise Stefanik asked in the hearing about Columbia law professor Catherine Franke. Shafik volunteered that Franke, whose position at the law school where she had taught for 25 years, was terminated, and other professors were being investigated. In an apparent reference to visiting Columbia professor Mohammed Abdu, she claimed he was terminated and promised he will never teach at Columbia again. Professor Abdu is suing Columbia for defamation, discrimination, harassment, and financial and professional loss. The Center for Constitutional Rights wrote of the betrayal of Franke, "In an egregious attack on both academic freedom and Palestinian rights advocacy, Columbia University has entered into an agreement with Catherine Franke to leave her teaching position after an esteemed 25-year career. The move, a termination dressed up in more palatable terms, according to Franke's statement, stems from her advocacy for students who speak out in support of Palestinian rights." Her ostensible offense was a comment expressing concern about Columbia's failure to address harassment of Palestinians and their allies by Israeli students who come to campus straight from military service, after Israeli students sprayed Palestinian rights protesters with a toxic chemical. For this, she was investigated for harassment and found to be in violation of Columbia's policies. The actual cause of her forced departure is the crackdown on dissent at Columbia, resulting from historic protests opposing Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Frankie's fate was sealed when former Columbia President Minouche Shafik threw her under the bus during her cowardly appearance before Congress. You can see my interview with Frankie on the Chris Hedges Report YouTube channel. Despite her capitulation to the Zionist lobby, Shafik resigned a little more than a year after assuming her position as head of the university. The crackdown at Columbia continues, with an estimated 80 people arrested and over 65 students suspended following a protest in the library in the first week of May. Former television journalist and Columbia's acting president Claire Shipman condemned the protest, stating, "Disruptions to our academic activities will not be tolerated and are violations of our rules and policies. Columbia strongly condemns violence on our campus, anti-Semitism, and all forms of hate and discrimination, some of which we witnessed today." Of course, appeasement doesn't work. This witch hunt, whether under the Biden or Trump administration, was never grounded in good faith. It was about decapitating Israel's critics and marginalizing the liberal class and the left. It's sustained by lies and slander, which these institutions continue to embrace. Watching these liberal institutions, who are hostile to the left, be smeared by Trump for harboring Marxist lunatics, radical leftists, and communists exposes another failing of the liberal class. It was the left that could have saved these institutions, or at least given them the fortitude, not to mention analysis, to take a principled stand. The left at least calls apartheid, apartheid, and genocide, genocide. Media outlets regularly publish articles and op-eds uncritically accepting claims made by Zionist students and faculty. They fail to clarify the distinction between being Jewish and being Zionist. They demonize student protesters. They never bothered reporting with any depth or honesty from the student encampments, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians made common cause. They routinely mischaracterize anti-Zionist, anti-genocide, and pro-Palestinian liberation slogans and policy demands as hate speech, anti-Semitic, or contributing to Jewish students feeling unsafe. Examples include the New York Times, "Why the campus protests are so troubling. I'm a Columbia professor. The protests on my campus are not justice." And "Universities face an urgent question. What makes a protest anti-Semitic?" The Washington Post, "Call the campus protests what they are. At Columbia, excuse the students but not the faculty." The Atlantic, "Campus protest encampments are unethical," and "Columbia University's anti-Semitism problem." Slate, "When pro-Palestine protests cross into anti-Semitism." Vox, "The rising tide of anti-Semitism on college campuses amid Gaza protests." Mother Jones, "How pro-Palestine protests spark anti-Semitism on campus." The Cut, New York Magazine, "The problem with pro-Palestine protests on campus." And the Daily Beast, "Anti-Semitism surges amid pro-Palestine protests at U.S. universities." The New York Times, in a decision worthy of George Orwell, instructed its reporters to eschew words such as refugee camps, occupied territory, slaughter, massacre, carnage, genocide, and ethnic cleansing when writing about Palestine, according to an internal memo obtained by The Intercept. It discourages the very use of the word Palestine in routine text and headlines. In December 2023, Democratic Governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, sent a letter to university and college presidents who failed to condemn and address anti-Semitism and calls for the genocide of any group. She warned that they would be subjected to aggressive enforcement action by New York State. The following year, in late August, Hochul repeated these warnings during a virtual meeting with 200 university and college leaders. Hochul made clear in October 2024 that she considered pro-Palestine slogans to be explicit calls for genocide of Jews. There are laws on the books, human rights laws, state and federal laws, that I will enforce if you allow for the discrimination of our students on campus, even calling for the genocide of the Jewish people, which is what is meant by from the river to the sea, by the way, she said at a memorial event at the Temple Israel Center in White Plains. Those are not innocent-sounding words. They're filled with hate. The governor successfully pressured City University of New York, CUNY, to remove a job posting for a Palestinian studies professorship at Hunter College, which referenced settler colonialism, genocide, and apartheid. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, in his new book, Antisemitism in America, A Warning, leads efforts by the Democratic Party, which has a dismal 27% approval rating in a recent NBC News poll, to denounce those protesting the genocide as carrying out a blood libel against Jews. Whatever one's view of how the war in Gaza was conducted, it is not, and has never been, the policy of the Israeli government to exterminate the Palestinian people, he writes, ignoring hundreds of calls by Israeli officials to wipe Palestinians from the face of the earth during 19 months of saturation bombing and enforced starvation. The grisly truth, openly acknowledged by Israeli officials, is far different. We are disassembling Gaza and leaving it as piles of rubble, with total destruction which has no precedent globally. And the world isn't stopping us, gloats Israel's finance minister Bezalel Smotrich. Last night, almost 100 Gazans were killed. It doesn't interest anyone. Everyone has gotten used to the fact that we can kill 100 Gazans in one night during a war, and nobody cares in the world. Israeli Knesset member Zvi Sukkot told Israel's Channel 12 on May 16th. The perpetuation of the fiction of widespread anti-Semitism, which of course exists, but which is not fostered or condoned by these institutions, coupled with the refusal to say out loud what is being live-streamed to the world, has shattered what little moral authority these institutions and liberals had left. It gives credibility to Trump's effort to cripple and destroy all institutions that sustain a liberal democracy. Trump surrounds himself with neo-Nazi sympathizers such as Elon Musk and Christian fascists who condemn Jews for crucifying Christ. But anti-Semitism by the right gets a free pass, since these good anti-Semites cheer on Israel's settler colonial project of extermination, one these neo-Nazis and Christian fascists would like to replicate on brown and black people in the name of the Great Replacement theory. Trump trumpets the fiction of white genocide in South Africa. He signed an executive order in February that fast-tracked immigration to the U.S. for Afrikaners, white South Africans. Harvard, which is attempting to save itself from the wrecking ball of the Trump administration, was as complicit in this witch hunt as everyone else, flagellating itself for not being more repressive towards campus critics of the genocide. The university's former president, Claudine Gay, condemned the pro-Palestine slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which demands the right of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, as bearing specific historical meanings that to a great many people imply the eradication of Jews from Israel. Harvard substantially tightened its regulations regarding student protests in January 2024 and increased the police presence on its campus. It barred 13 students from graduating, citing alleged policy violations linked to their participation in a protest encampment, despite an earlier agreement to avoid punitive measures. It placed more than 20 students on involuntary leave, and in some cases evicted students from their housing. Such policies were replicated across the country. The capitulations and crackdowns on pro-Palestine activism, academic freedom, freedom of speech, suspensions, expulsions, and firings since October 7, 2023, have not spared U.S. colleges and universities from further attacks. Since Trump took office, at least $11 billion in federal research grants and contracts have been cut or frozen nationwide, according to NPR. This includes Harvard, $3 billion, Columbia, $400 million, University of Pennsylvania, $175 million, and Brandeis, $6 to $7.5 million annually. On May 22nd, the Trump administration intensified its attacks on Harvard by terminating its ability to enroll international students that make up around 27% of the student body. This administration is holding Harvard accountable for fostering violence, anti-Semitism, and coordinating with the Chinese Communist Party on its campus, Kristi Noem, DHS secretary, wrote on X when posting screenshots of the letter she sent to Harvard revoking foreign student enrollment. Let this serve as a warning to all universities and academic institutions across the country. Harvard, like Columbia, the media, the Democratic Party, and the liberal class, misread power by refusing to acknowledge or name the genocide in Gaza and persecuting those who do. They provided the bullets to their executioners. They are paying the price for their stupidity and cowardice. That was Trump's Useful Idiots, written by Chris Hedges, narrated by Eunice Wong. For the Chris Hedges Report, chrishedges.substack.com.